they need to be able to kind of get things running. And I think you have to accept to a certain extent that the next Conservative leadership contest is going to be, it'll be pretty spicy, whatever happens.
Yeah.
So you might as well perhaps just rip the plaster off, get it done immediately and move on, rather than letting it, letting it bubble on for ages with this sort of, quite undignified infighting.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Division Bell. Sam and John can't be here today because they're over in Washington at the NATO summit with the new Prime Minister. So instead you've got me, Martyn Brown, Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Express.
And I'm Lizzy Buchan, I'm Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror.
So, we were just talking about the football last night. We both stayed up and watched it. Great result, and a great result for the Prime Minister in the Oval Office in Washington last night.
What a week for Keir Starmer. I mean, so lucky to kind of come in on this sort of huge wave of optimism and then get a win in the Euros, and you get to go to the final on Sunday as Prime Minister. I mean, he must be absolutely delighted with the kind of optics of it and the fact that he can come in and say, we've changed the country and we're doing all of this stuff, all the politics, but really what people, to capitalise on that optimism and like good cheer from the public what a win.
Politics is timing, isn't it? You just got to seize your moments, and to have the president saying that football's coming home and it's down to you must be a hell of a boon. He's over in Washington for a NATO summit, and a very important one. It's the 75th anniversary as well of NATO, important because of what's happening in Ukraine. And the Prime Minister's met Biden for the first time. And again, they've used that word, special relationship that we have with the US. And it just goes to show the kind of relationship we do have with the US and how important it is.
Yeah, as you said before, timing is, politics is all about timing, and it's very good timing, again, for Keir Starmer to be newly elected as Prime Minister and immediately get the opportunity to go to Washington for the NATO summit. The relationship with the US is one of the key ones for this country, and so having the chance, a couple of days into the job to go to NATO, to look statesmanlike, and to go to the White House, and have that meeting in the Oval Office, get all of those pictures and start to cement that kind of relationship, to show Joe Biden, who he is, what he's about, to try and reassure other leaders that, of what his style of leadership is going to be. That's, really crucial. And particularly with the US, it's quite interesting that I think we were both at the G7 summit recently in Italy, and there were a lot of people there remarking about how a lot of the leaders there were really in trouble, were having a difficult time at home, apart from the Italian PM, Giorgia Meloni, who was very popular. And Biden was sort of facing lots of questions about, his health, is he really up to it, sort of thing. And Rishi Sunak was there, obviously tanking in the polls. And now Keir Starmer's out in the US with a massive majority. He's suddenly the one who's saying, at least for now, things are looking good for me at home.
Yeah, and he is one of a number of centre-left leaders: Biden, Macron, Trudeau, Scholz, and Starmer himself. So, but a lot of them are on shaky ground. So, watch this space. It'd be interesting to see what it's like in a few months' time, possibly with Trump coming in. Have you been to a NATO summit before? Have you got any stories?
I haven't. Never NATO. Never NATO, though I've been to G7 and I've been on a number of prime ministerial trips.
They're always, particularly ones to the US are important, and as you say, for the cameras. And do you remember the one with Theresa May and Trump holding her hand as they walked outside the White House? And that, I think that sent shockwaves through number 10 for starters. But it is important, and even Trump, I think, was remarking on the special relationship between Britain and the USA. And I remember back, I didn't go on the trip, but I've heard stories about Gordon Brown in 2009. It was 2009. It was a G20 summit in Pittsburgh. And I think preceding the summit, Number 10 had been trying to get a meeting with Obama. And the story was that Obama was kind of snubbing him, and then he was snubbing him at the G20, and they finally met in the kitchen of all places of the summit. And it got out, and then they did the official stuff, and it was all the special relationship and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, Gordon Brown got on the plane with the journalists on the way home and was absolutely spitting tacks. He was slamming the chairs, the seats and everything. So what you see on camera is not always what actually happens. But no, fair play to Keir Starmer. He's riding the crest of a wave at the moment, and I hope he said that England are going to win on Sunday, so I hope that is the case. But and he's going to the final, as you say.
It'll be interesting to see what the relationship between Keir Starmer and Joe Biden is going forward, because, as you said, prime ministers and presidents have had sort of their ups and downs over the years, and the Theresa May and Donald Trump relationship was quite funny. I remember going to they did a joint press conference at Chequers, the prime minister's sort of like grace and favour house, and it had been that morning. One of the newspapers, one of our rivals, had run an interview with Donald Trump where he'd praised Boris Johnson and said that Theresa May's Brexit deal wasn't very good and that sort of thing. And then they had to do a joint press conference together. And the sort of atmosphere was really tense, and it felt like we were all waiting around in this really hot garden for ages. And then eventually they came out and then they held hands again. And I remember just thinking, this is so bizarre.
Yeah.
And the journalist who'd written the story was behind me and sort of asked a question about it. And Donald Trump just pretended he'd forgotten about the interview. And Theresa May was sort of standing there, sort of rigid, kind of, trying not to address it. But it is a very fraught thing, isn't it? And some have been better than others.
It'd be interesting because Biden obviously had a very bad day yesterday, particularly with George Clooney telling him to step down. And so we could be quite possibly having Trump back in the White House, and the dynamic between him and Starmer would be very interesting. And that's one thing they're trying to do at this NATO summit, is to try and kind of Trump-proof a deal over Ukraine, aren't they, to make sure that aid can go to Ukraine and help go to Ukraine, if Trump comes in and doesn't want to do that. One thing I think that would concern certainly the Tory party is Keir Starmer going and taking his kind of European team over to NATO as well, and they're trying to forge closer ties with Europe, particularly on defence and other areas. And that's one thing that you probably know more about than me, that he's been trying to push at this summit, and will do again probably next week at the EPC summit that's going to be held in Oxfordshire.
Yeah, I think Europe is a big question, isn't it? Because it's been sort of, under the last few Conservative governments, or Conservative prime ministers, it's been sort of the taboo thing, any suggestion of any rolling back of Brexit in any way, or even perception of it, is just causes outcry. And so no one could ever really say anything about trying to improve any kind of relationship without sort of firing up the Jacob Rees-Moggs of the world. But so Keir Starmer's not been so clear on what his eventual aims are. He said that they want to forge closer ties with Europe. They've talked about, particularly on sort of border security, as well, about working more closely to try and stop the small boats, the people arriving in small boats across the Channel. And I think there's going to be conversations about trade, though they're always very careful to say that they don't want to rejoin the single market or the customs union. But I think there are unanswered questions there. And obviously it was quite interesting, he's put Nick Thomas-Symonds into, who's sort of a long-serving MP and an ally of Keir Starmer, into quite key roles, sort
but
of
non-cabinet roles.
Non-cabinet, but looking at European stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what that job actually is and what his brief is once the dust settles.
I think alarm bells are already ringing at how fast all this is happening. We all knew that it was going to be coming, but to be doing it within a week, I think, publicly talking about closer ties with Europe on a whole number of areas, and Rachel Reeves mentioned it in a speech on Monday. I think that's concerning for some people, although it is timing. The fact that the election was held and the summits are happening straight after.
Yeah.
But anyway, one to watch. I think that definitely. Now it's been a busy first week, hasn't it? We've hit the ground running.
It's only been a week,
and all the new MPs are back and getting sworn in.
Yeah, it's been a crazy sort of few days. Obviously, Parliament returned on Tuesday after kind of breaking up for the election campaign, and we've started with the sort of ceremonial aspects of a lot of it. So MPs had to swear an oath of allegiance to the King, which they have to do to formally be allowed to serve as MPs. So that all kind of kicked off on Tuesday. And first they had to elect the Commons Speaker as well, who sort of presides over everything in the Commons. And there was quite a fun depending on your view, bit of ceremony, which the Speaker has to sort of nominate themselves, and then if they are elected, they get dragged physically by 2 or 3 MPs to their chair, which I think is a sort of antique custom from when the Speaker used to convey to Parliament's message to the King or Queen. And so that could be risky if you were sort of saying something that the monarch might not like. So it's sort of a way of showing that you're reluctant to take the role because it could be risky. You might end up losing your head if you tell the king something that he doesn't want to hear. So yeah, we had a bit of that, which must look quite strange on the screens, but it's just part of the kind of weirdness of Parliament.
What struck me being in the chamber up in the press gallery was just the stark change of. I know they do swap sides anyway, the opposition and the government, but there's just the number of Labour MPs, the number of Lib Dems in there, so much, and how packed the Commons was as well, because they were up on the upper tier of seats as well, and I was where I sit. I was next to a lot of Labour MPs who were there, and they were grumbling when Nigel Farage, who was the only Reform member to bag a seat on the green benches, and when he gave his little leader's speech, he had a little pop at John Bercow, calling him a little man, bit of Brexit revenge there for Nigel. But the Labour MPs who were sat behind me were grumbling and groaning and saying it's ill-judged. But I thought, by and large, I thought all the speeches were very good. I thought Keir Starmer's obviously, and Rishi Sunak gave a very dignified speech. I thought, again, he apologised for losing the election to the MPs who'd lost their seats. Ed Davey lowered the tone a little bit. I thought he took a little swipe at the Tories in his speech, but all in all, it was good-natured, and it was interesting. But just a stark change in personnel, really.
I thought, I think Ed Davey got a bit more political, as did Nigel Farage. But it was interesting, the Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, just watching them swap sides for the first time really is quite something. And, you know, whatever you might think of Rishi Sunak's politics or leadership, you know, that must be quite a difficult thing to do, to have been Prime Minister and then to stand there and have to say, you know, congratulations to the Prime Minister and all of that. And I think you're right. I think he did give quite, you know, he sort of met the moment with his speech. I thought afterwards, a lot of people were sort of tweeting, oh, you know, wasn't this great and all of that. And I did think maybe it would have been, maybe he could have shown a bit more of that in the campaign rather than, because actually some of the slanging in the campaign got really nasty, and some of the kind of targeting of Keir Starmer I thought was, you know, it was just a bit beneath him. And so it was, when you see him like that, you're like, he is a proper grown-up politician who really can be really dignified and can be a leader. And it's a shame that sometimes in the heat of a campaign some of that can get lost.
Yeah, I agree. And we're seeing that play out in the potential Tory leadership contest as well. despite calls from senior members of the party to calm down and, you know, show respect, it seems like two of the big contenders for Rishi Sunak's job kind of having a spat over social media. That's Kemi Badenoch, who there was a story written about her by the Times, some supposedly leaked comments from the opposition's first cabinet meeting, or shadow cabinet meeting, where she's supposed to have said that, or had a go at Rishi Sunak for leaving D-Day early, and she wasn't too happy with how the campaign was run. But also she said that Suella Braverman is having a public nervous breakdown, to which then Kemi Badenoch said it was wrong that all the stuff was leaked from the cabinet, and then Suella Braverman then replied, "I'm interested to know about this public nervous breakdown I'm having." So, and then there were more messages. So it'd be interesting to see those two fighting out for the Tory leadership, but I'm not sure it's good for the party.
That's absolutely extraordinary, that. I mean, also interesting that Kemi didn't disown any of the comments that she supposedly made, which were leaked in quite complete fashion. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd be suspicious about where that came from. But yeah, I mean, no matter how much people say, you know, the party needs to rebuild, the party needs to listen, this was inevitable. There's, you know, it just seems like some of the characters that are still left around who want the leadership, they don't really, you know, I've heard said before that Kemi Badenoch could start a fight in an empty room, which certainly seems to be my impression from watching over this period. And Suella Braverman the same. You know, they are quite punchy. They, you know, they're not afraid of kind of really calling people out on various things. Kemi loves to have arguments with people on Twitter. She's often arguing with journalists, other politicians. And so I think if I was a Conservative member thinking about who I wanted as my leader, I'm not sure I'd be particularly impressed by this. And the voters have delivered a resounding verdict on the last Conservative government, and you would hope that the sensible heads in the party are actually going to listen to that and try and learn from it, because otherwise where do you go from there?
Do you not think Kemi Badenoch is the leader that Keir Starmer and Labour fear the most?
I think that's possible. She's certainly popular with activists, and she is, you know, she's very competent. She's a bright minister. She's a good performer. I think she'd certainly be more concerning to them than someone like Suella. But I don't know yet whether they have anything to fear at the moment. It slightly depends on where you would end up being. But I certainly don't think that they would be dismissive of her as an opponent. I think she is formidable in a lot of ways.
I think she has a vision which doesn't necessarily come through with some of the potential contenders. But going back to what we were saying about the new parliament, it was evident, even though Rishi Sunak is saying he'll stick around until the process is sorted for a new leader, it's evident they need a new leader, and they need to be a strong opposition, even if they are dwarfed by Labour in Parliament. You need to have that strong opposition in place, and it's the big question at the moment is whether they're going to go quickly and get it sorted by conference season, which is towards the end of September, early October, and then you have a potential Labour budget coming up in October, November. Or do they go long and take a bit more time and maybe have someone in place by Christmas? There's arguments for and against both options, but I think if we've seen the last few days to go by, the longer you go, the more infighting happens.
I totally agree. I think in an ideal world, I can understand why you would argue that it would be worth waiting to try and like make sure that people are tested properly, that heads cool, that everybody has a bit of time to really think about what they want and what the party needs. But in reality, you don't have that time. Like, Nigel Farage is already in Parliament, already sort of, you know, making moves. He will only continue to do that. Labour need to be scrutinised. Everyone would agree with that. You know, even papers like mine who support Labour, the government always needs to be scrutinised, and and opposition is part of our politics. And actually, you can't wait until after a budget. That's crazy. And you can't wait, because Labour are going to hit the ground running. They're doing stuff all the time. And right now we're getting sort of, you know, I'm getting calls constantly, press releases from government departments of all the things they're trying to do. And then occasionally, like 8 hours after a speech, you might get a quote from CCHQ, and it's like, that just isn't good enough. Like, if they need to be able to kind of get things running. And I think you have to accept to a certain extent that the next Conservative leadership contest is going to be, it'll be pretty spicy, whatever happens. Yeah. So you might as well perhaps just rip the plaster off, get it done immediately and move on, rather than letting it, letting it bubble on for ages with this sort of, you know, quite undignified infighting.
This unpicking Brexit thing will only result in Nigel Farage kind of seizing that ground and fighting back against it, and until you've got a Tory opposition that is kind of match fit and ready with a leader.
He'll take space wherever he can find it, and he'll definitely find it on Brexit. He'll also get into, you know, there's space on immigration, on small boats, on all of that sort of thing. Obviously, Labour have said that they're getting rid of the Rwanda deportation scheme. You know, if Nigel Farage starts making moves in that space, then that does make life more difficult for the Conservatives.
And I think Keir Starmer admitted yesterday that it's going to get worse in the next few weeks and months because of, it always does in the summer, and there's going to be more crossings. I think crossings earlier this week. It seems like the boats are getting bigger because there's more and more migrants on each boat, and numbers are just going to go up in the short term anyway. And as you say, Nigel Farage will seize on that. We had James Cleverly did a piece in the Daily Express the other day saying that Labour are effectively hanging a welcome sign on the White Cliffs of Dover, and But that's James Cleverly. He's not the leader, and you're just going to get different Tories saying different things, and that's where they need the leadership to be sorted soon. And of course, we got a big announcement on prisons tomorrow. Shabana Mahmood is going to announce plans to alleviate the overcrowding in prisons, which from everyone I speak to is absolutely a crisis point. So effectively there will be cutting down sentences or the early release dates for some targeted prisoners. Now that helps the problem of overcrowding, but leaves Labour open to accusations that they're letting criminals onto the streets.
Yeah, I think this was an issue that was at the top of the agenda for sort of the last government as well, but it's really politically difficult to do. Prisons are obviously in a terrible state, and huge overcrowding, the buildings are terrible, there's loads of shortages in probation, all of that sort of thing. It's a bit of a mess, really. And you can see the fact that they're having to make an announcement on this in the first week shows how bad it is, because I'm sure this is not where they would want to start things. So this will be the kind of first big test, really, for the new government. And you're right to say, you know, it's a really difficult line to tread of kind of dealing with the reality of what is happening, of how overcrowded prisons are, of the fact that there just aren't any cells, people are being sent all over the country, and trying to appear tough on crime. You know, we had an op-ed in the paper today from the new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, talking about, you know, how Labour are going to restore trust and confidence in policing and all of that sort of thing. But it's very hard for people to feel confident in policing if they feel that there aren't enough police to do things, and then if people are arrested, they can't be sent to prison, or they're getting let out early. And there have been terrible examples of, you know, I think it was the murder of Zara Lina in London by somebody who is out on licence. Like this is a very fraught area, and I think they'll be concerned about getting the balance right of like keeping the public safe.
I mean, what a lot of people want is criminals to be arrested, locked up, and you can't do that at the moment because the prisons are full. You can't build new prisons quickly enough because they take years to build. Some people would argue why not use prison boats as a short-ish term solution. I know that's a controversial issue, but Alex Chalk, the previous incumbent of the job, was on the airwaves this morning or yesterday saying that he wanted to do what Labour are doing tomorrow earlier this year, but it was kind of vetoed by the then PM Rishi Sunak because it wouldn't have been a good look before a general election. And is one thing to look and act tough on crime, but when you haven't got the infrastructure in place, it's very tough to control.
Yeah, and I think Keir Starmer was talking about this at the NATO summit, saying, you know, that the situation is even worse than he'd realised in prisons. So, yeah, I think Labour have made law and order one of their kind of key tenets of what they've been standing for, and I think this is going to be a real challenge because, you know, as you said, there are lots of people who think people commit crimes, you just lock them up, that's it. But there are also arguments that short sentences are not good for people, that, you know, that they actually disrupt people's lives, mean that they're more likely to reoffend, that it actually doesn't really solve anything. And I think you could see Keir Starmer's hired James Timpson as one of his justice ministers, who has done a lot of work with sort of former offenders and has said that he thinks that way too many people are in prison, and we should be finding sort of other ways to allow people to repay their debt to society for less serious crimes. So that is also a signal that they might be preparing to move in another direction anyway, regardless of what the prison's infrastructure is.
Keir Starmer would be keen to nip this in the bud because any new Prime Minister gets a honeymoon period, and he's enjoying his at the moment with the football and things like that, and the seemingly successful trip to NATO. But a prisons crisis could quickly get out of control, and then the shine wears off and the honeymoon's gone. So he'd be keen to get on top of this quickly. Remains to be seen whether the announcement we expect to be coming tomorrow will do that, but another one to watch this space, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, the honeymoon period is going to be pretty short, I think.
Should we do moment of the week? What would be your moment of the week so far?
Yeah.
We're only on...
Yeah, what day are we on? Thursday.
Yeah.
Moment of the week. I thought the first phone call between Keir Starmer and Joe Biden was really interesting. They released a video of it, which is highly unusual, of sort of Keir Starmer in Downing Street and sort of the woman on the phone going, connecting you to Air Force One and hold for the president and all of that. And then they had a little chat, which I thought was a fascinating decision to kind of open the door on that, which is very unusual. And obviously, you know, shows how much Keir Starmer's prioritising not only that relationship, like the US relationship, but also the diplomatic stuff, that he really wants to be seen as a statesman. He really wants to restore Britain's place on the world stage. I think you know, leading into NATO, all of that is something that he really wants to focus on. So I thought that was really interesting and quite fun to see.
I did enjoy that. There was a couple of kind of honourable mentions, I think, for moment of the week would be Diane Abbott's speech during the ceremony we were talking about earlier, the speaker's ceremony, and also there was an off mic moment for Jeremy Corbyn as well. But I guess I guess the moment of the week is, for me anyway, is the in the Oval Office, as we were talking about earlier, the talk about the England football team and football coming home. So it was a big win there, I thought, or PR win for Starmer. I just hope it pays off on Sunday. So I don't know whether we have to pick a winner out of those two. I'm happy to go either way, but
let's pick the football.
We'll go to penalties, shall we?
Yeah.
And then,
I think let's pick the football, especially the bit where he sort of said, "Oh, it's coming home," and then, President Biden said, "Oh, it's because of the new Prime Minister." I mean, you couldn't ask for better PR than that. So I'm sure Number 10 would have been delighted.
Thank you for listening to us on the Division Bell. You'll be pleased to hear that Sam and John will be back next time. And you can catch up with us again on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the show will also be available to watch on YouTube.
And you can follow us on YouTube at the Division Bell Podcast, on X at Daily Express and at Daily Mirror, and on TikTok at Mirror Politics, to let us know what you think about what's been happening.
And if there's anything you want us to discuss on the next episode or future episodes, please use the hashtag #TheDivisionBell.
Thank you for listening. This is a Reach Studio production hosted by myself, John Stevens, and Sam Lister. Produced and edited by Lydia O'Malley and Shabir Nuzai. Our researcher is Sheila Mahmoodi, and designs have been done by Curtis Phillips-Cozier and Luke Stidson. Audio managed by Matt Millard, and social content managed by Gully Burrows and Ed Washington. Content production and design overseen by Yara Silver, Harry Dumanel and Spencer Robotham.